What is up, everyone? Welcome to episode 1 of Indie Ignition, a Twin Sons podcast sideshow where Josh, my co host here, and I bring you discussions and reviews of one indie game at a time. And I guess before we get started, Josh, like I said, that's kind of the basic premise of the show, but we're pretty much going to pick an indie game that we're into at the moment. We're going to describe what it is, talk about the core gameplay of it, kind of give a shout out to the developer, discuss where you can buy the game, talk about the pros and cons, and then finally leave a solid verdict. But Josh, what made us really want to do this?
Basically, I feel like over the past couple of months, there has been, a growing of us going on Steam and being like, oh, we like these games, we like these games.
Yeah,
And
for
they
sure.
always are just little indie games. Um, you know, kind of stemmed from Runeterra being a card game, and then we started
Yep, yep.
looking into deck builders. And then it just got to a point where we're like, oh, it'd be great if we had a multiplayer deck builder game. And Shane did a really quick Steam or Google search,
That's it.
and we came across
We came
the theme.
across. There
Oh,
you
yes,
go.
I didn't even mean to do that one, but we came across the obelisk.
That's it. So literally, how this started was essentially I googled multiplayer co-op RPG deck building game, roguelike, and there's only one really that I could find, and it's Across the Obelisk. Turns out it's actually a really good game. So from there, Josh and I have been playing a bunch of other ones as well, mostly single player ones, obviously, since there's not really too many co-op ones, but. As far as history goes, Josh and I are huge card gamers in general. We're both hosts of Runeterra podcast, Legends of Runeterra podcast. I've been gaming forever, and indie games in general are some of my favorite. I guess I'll just do a quick shout out of my own like personal one of my favorites. Everyone will say like Slay the Spire and things as far as deck building games go. That's definitely one of the bigger ones. We're gonna try to stick to slightly more obscure games that not everyone's heard of. But I guess one of my all-time favorites is probably For the King, which isn't a card game. It's a more of like a tactical turn-based combat game, but it's also an RPG and it's a roguelite where you're continuously progressing. Overall, you're buying more things from the shop, and each individual run separates itself. So that's one of my favorites. Josh, if you want to give them just one of your all-time favorite, I
One of
guess.
my all-time favorites. It's so hard because like indie games, I've been playing them for a while, and I'm just all over the place. Whether it's simulation, whether it's deck building, but if I was going to give one that I know has been a huge time sink for me, it'll have to be They Are Billions. It's a zombie survival game that took me like 40 hours before I actually
Dang.
beat a run.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it's like macro, like I'm gonna say like StarCraft where you're managing,
Mm-hmm.
building up your resources and your army, and then you're going out and scouting the zombies, and then you have to survive waves of zombies every so often. It is one of maybe I'm just bad at it, who knows, but it was one of the hardest but addicting games that I have ever played.
I was gonna say some listeners out there right now just saying, "No, I beat that first run." Like, what are you talking
I
about?
I can imagine that maybe I'm just really bad at it, so.
Yeah, that's the best thing about indie games. They're so cheap and, can just last you so many hours. So Josh and I both have put, I haven't looked it up, but quite a few hours. We've done multiple playthroughs of Across the Obelisk. So to get you guys started, we kind of tease what it is, but it is a co-op RPG deck building roguelite. So you do make progression on individual runs, but they also make progression throughout your overall game. That's kind of where the RPG factor comes in. But co-op is what really makes this game stand out, and we'll dive more into how that gameplay actually goes. For right now, if you are interested in purchasing the game, you can buy it on Steam. It's just $17.99. It is currently in early access, so they are iterating and putting out new expansions consistently since even when we started playing just a couple months ago.
Yeah, I find that so amazing, just an indie game, how far the gaming industry is coming, just
Right.
an indie game getting patches,
Yep.
it's amazing. But wanted to give a shout out to the developer. They are Dream Sight Games. I did some research. There's not much I could find. But I will say they are from Spain and they only have one other game. They are Empire TV Tycoon. But I want to say thank you for making the one and only co-op deck builder.
That we can find at least. Yeah, and I have searched, so for real, this is very deserving of the first episode here. Yeah, so that's essentially it from their standpoint. They do have Twitter and on social media, and they do have a Discord where they keep you posted about all of their new releases, which we'll also be talking about in a little bit. But to break it down, let's just talk about a little bit of the gameplay. So you might be wondering, how does a co-op deck builder work? Well, you're not building the same deck. Actually, what happens is you build a party of 4 heroes chosen from various classes. Now, these classes kind of just consist of rogue, wizard, priest, warrior, and then there's X different varieties of those classes. But what actually happens is each hero gets its own deck. So if you're going to play this solo, right, Josh, you're going to have to go in and build 4 individual decks. Now, those decks might not be as convoluted as, say, a different roguelite deck builder would be, where typically your deck kind of gets massive and very complicated. They're slightly more simplified, but they still have a decent amount of reach and flexibility from the 4 individual decks. Past that, you're actually going to start the game, and you actually get to. This is one of the more interesting things. I haven't really seen this before, but when you start a run, you actually can begin to shift your deck and build your deck right then by removing cards as well. So a lot of these deck builder strategy games, you actually remove cards as you go, but right at the front, you can actually remove and refine a small deck or a large deck, and then base that around. Josh, have you ever played anything that has anything like that?
No, like usually it's just, you go into the deck builder. You might be able to choose one thing or get like a random upgrade randomly here and there, but it's never like, oh, you could set um, kind of the path that you want to take with your deck, which I find it was definitely daunting, and it still is when we experience a new character. But I
Right.
find it fun and kind of refreshing because, like, oh, I want to try this build, and then you could go in, spend your resources that you got from past game run through.
Right.
So we didn't even say that, but basically,
Yeah.
you do a run through. You can take resources from your last run and go. So you actually have resources to build your decks for whatever characters you were playing at that time.
Right. Yeah. I've never seen that personally either. And it definitely makes it stand out. I mean, there are moments where those games kind of become, all right, well, Act 1 now, all I have to do is play the same 6 cards that I started with every single run. This time it lets you just start right from the
Yeah.
gate with a completely different run. So you can try a whole new strategy and right at the beginning. And if it doesn't work, you find out quick, which is nice because
Yes.
then you just lose and you can start over and, remake it instead of committing a whole run to trying to build toward this point and it doesn't really work that well. It's very interesting. And I think that's definitely one of the big standout points I wanted to
For
highlight.
me, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. In combat per se, so the combat works. It is a card game, so you're going to be kind of functioning very similarly to how Slay the Spire works, or multiple other roguelikes or deck builders like that. Essentially, your cards will deal X damage or provide X block, and the enemies have intents above their heads, so you can see what they're going to do. But instead of just like the enemy's going to attack, they actually have a secret card that they're going to play. They also play a card back at you, or 2 cards, or 3 cards, and there are ways to get sneak peeks into what they're going to do. So the intent isn't always known, whereas in most of these games, the intent is known. You kind of can predict what, you see what your opponent's going to do. You have to play your turn out accordingly. This one, there's a little bit more of a random factor where you have to attempt to guess or use tricks to find out, and then deal damage or block accordingly. And the other interesting thing is that position in this actually matters. I haven't played a whole lot of the deck builders where the position matters of the heroes. So like we said, it is 4 heroes to run. So you will have a front and back. They never switch during the run. They're always in that order. And they will also do specific attacks to other ordered enemies. So the enemies also have up to 4 units in front to back positions. And attacks will have specific targets of middle hero, back hero, front hero, etc. And then from there, that's pretty much how the battles will build. As you build your decks, you get more and more crazy effects that can hit multiple heroes or splash damage and etc. from there. Anything else I'm missing there, Josh, on the position battles?
No, the position battles, no. For other combat, I will say there is a ton of buffs and debuffs that
Yeah.
you can apply or take. There's a lot to like learn what does what. We've played over 10 run throughs and I'm still hovering over to see what things do.
Yeah,
Um,
there are multiple times where you'll have a unit with like 15 keywords underneath, or
yes.
buffs or debuffs, and it's like I need to take a second to read. So it's a plus and a minus. It makes you think a lot, but sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, I need to really read all this.
Yeah. One other thing that I will say is They do like all the enemies do have like resistances actually. So like
Yep.
unlike you go into like Slay the Spire, everything is kind of default resistance.
Right.
There's resistance to every type: fire, lightning, ice, water, melee,
Yep.
melee with blunt force, melee with slashing and
Right.
piercing. It's like they have resistances to everything that can do damage. There is a resistance counter to it.
Yep.
So it makes when you're fighting, like, oh, I need to do this much damage, but I'm using a guy with a sword, and this guy has a bunch of armor on, so he's
Yep.
really good against slashing. So I might as well just try and defend instead.
Yep.
So there's that. But I will also say, unlike, if you're playing Slay the Spire or Roguebook, sometimes those enemies are just like gonna kill you in one shot. They just have this one little thing that is
Yep.
just like it's going to destroy you if you don't play around it. In Across the Obelisk, it's more of a grindy battle, I could say. So like
Yeah.
the enemies will beat you down over time,
Yep. Yep.
and it's okay not seeing the intent all
Right.
the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. We didn't really. Now that I guess we laid the groundwork of how the game would function, the multiplayer option comes in essentially. If you haven't guessed yet, is that essentially there are four different heroes that you're playing. You can split those up to four players. So you could play with everybody gets their own hero. I've played solo a bit, and we've only played ever with just Josh and I as the two multiplayer. So we're both controlling at that point two decks, which feels really good. I'm not sure how much I would like the game. If you're playing with four full people, the enemies all have their turn that goes relatively quick, but just having one turn would feel a little bit not enough. You're only going to be paying attention to the screen every 3 to 4 minutes, whereas when you're playing with two, you're pretty tuned in to the gameplay most of the time when it's just two of us. So that's just speaking from speculation. We haven't actually played with four.
I don't think we mentioned it. It is turn-based, based on speed.
Yes,
So
yeah. There's an
so
initiative
like
system.
Yeah, so basically whoever it's fastest the slowest, and
Yep,
then
yep.
there's buffs and debuffs that can change that order, but it's not like your people go and then enemy goes. It's
Yep.
whoever has the fastest speed.
Yeah, that is also kind of a different. That kind of more goes into the tactical strategy aspect of most games, where they focus on that instead of just you go then they go passing turns. The heroes become a little bit unique, as like I said, there are four different classes and multiple heroes under each class. They all have a starting deck, which again you can shift around instantaneously. They have stat perks that you unlock. That's the RPG factor. As you do more runs, you get more perks on them. They also have like a unique card that comes with them that can't be removed. That's unique to their hero. And there are 5 item slots on each hero, and they each start with one particular item that will offer buffs and different advantages. And of course, all these things will change as you go. As you other than perks, perks will you start with and you die with, and then you gain more. But you get new items, you get new cards as you go throughout the game. Speaking of the actual game and what you're doing, there are 3 acts currently. You play Act 1 first every time, and then once you make it through Act 1, you can pick to go to either a red or green act. So you can pick the order in which you do those every time, and it's different. And that's all they are. And those acts are actually the same map each time. Now, that might sound right off the bat a little bit like it's not a ton of replayability there, but the interesting part is the map, you can't go backwards, so you're really only going forward. So there'll be plenty of nodes on the map as you're moving that you will miss each run, and doing each node will lead to certain events that will alter the outcome of future nodes if you go to the green or red act first, etc., etc. So Josh and I have done, like you said, probably ran through at least 10 playthroughs of this game, multiple, I mean, at least 30 plus hours on the game, and there are still nodes even on just those 3 basic maps that we haven't touched yet.
Yes.
And I mean, there's actually a decent amount that we haven't touched. Or also, maybe we've gone there, but we haven't done every outcome of those nodes because there's multiple outcomes. So that does kind of make it an interesting mechanic that I haven't really seen before. A lot of times these maps are kind of randomly generated. This one actually isn't, but surprisingly, it's not really a downfall too much, for in my opinion at least.
It does, certain characters are stronger at certain parts of like where you are.
Very true. Yeah.
Because like as you're going through the acts, the enemies you face, you know, they kind of change. Whether in the beginning you're versing, very wimpy stuff, and then it goes to like if you goes like one side of the map, you're versing like these trees, and it's
Right.
like they're bad against fire, but good against ice and other stuff. And then if you go to another portal, that portal has a lot of electricity and water, and the other portal has a lot of fire and stuff like
Right.
that. So characters. you can kind of map out depending on what characters you're using, which I think is pretty nice, and it at least allows for you to use those characters with them out without them being absolutely terrible. So
Agreed, for sure. That's pretty much the full gameplay loop. There are obviously, of course, like in most games, there's multiple elite bosses and elites that are just slightly easier than bosses, and interesting battles that have multiple different outcomes. So as we finish, we don't want to give full spoilers out. We just want to give you a general feel of how the gameplay would go to see if it would pique your interest, and give our personal takes on the game. We want to talk about the pros and the cons here before we get to our unique rating system that we have for each one of these episodes. So, first of all, pro for me, I guess I'll list the first pro and we'll just go back and forth if that's all right with you. But my first pro is just that it has a multiplayer and it's pretty clean. I mean, it's early
yeah,
access, but the multiplayer right away we picked it up, and that's, I mean, 90% of what I've played of Across the Obelisk was with you in multiplayer, and it felt really clean. We didn't have any bugs, any hiccups, really. It felt pretty good.
yeah. Honestly, because we've only played multiplayer, like controlling two decks, I kind of can't imagine playing the game any other way. I
Yeah,
think of
right.
managing four decks, and I'm like, oh my goodness, so that seems that
Yeah.
seems like a lot of work.
It does, and that's kind of the interesting part about the game in general. Because if you want to manage four decks, you certainly can. There are players who love that, but I really like the ability to just be able to share two and have a focus, and then you have two and you have a focus. So that's my first pro.
Yes, I'm going to go, with the extreme deck building potential. So there are a ton of cards, there are a ton of characters, and there's four classes, and it's kind of besides character specific cards that they give, everyone gets one character specific card.
Yeah,
Basically, you could build anyone, any class, anyway. So as you unlock the cards,
yeah,
you're like, oh, I want to try a poison build on this guy. It's like, okay, go ahead. Oh, I want to try a fire build on this guy. Go ahead. Um, and it definitely has a crazy amount of room to grow just because they have the different characters, they have the different classes, and then the way that you initiate the game by, building your deck how you want it or starting your build.
right.
They're just it kind of just lends to um, you being able to get what you want, like building. So like one of the
Yeah,
downfalls with Slay the Spire, it's like, oh, I want to do this build, but with RNG, it's like, oh, I can't do this build because I
right.
got this passive, I got this card here. This you could kind of set in stone what you're doing, and then there's RNG along the way, but you can really go towards what you want.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a big highlight of the game. I'd have to give just overall character design a as a pro here. I mean, it's not like perfectly outstanding. Some of the characters are, slightly generic, but they really do stand out between each other pretty well. I do think that there are some classes that are pretty much needed, like a priest. We've found that a priest is pretty much needed in most runs if you want to have full success. We've gone priestless, and
And
we've
tank.
yeah, priest and a tank, right? I mean, that's most games, right? You need someone to soak damage, you need someone to heal damage, and I get that. But I do think the designs are pretty unique. Like Josh's favorite priest functions in a completely different way than my favorite priest, which is always a really big bonus there. And kind of same thing with tanks. My one tank is more of a slashy type damage, and there's another tank who's pure, tank. That's just how we've decided to build them. And like Josh said, you could build them in various different ways. So the character design does shine. It's definitely a pro, not a con. Probably not the highest selling point for the game, though.
Yeah, and along with that, because of unique characters, extreme deck building potential, it has very high replayability, very, very high. The map being stagnant, and by that I mean just like it's the same every time, is people would say is a downside on replayability. But just if you're experimenting with
Yeah.
decks, if you're trying to unlock everything, there's enough characters in the game that you can do multiple run-throughs and try different builds with each of them. In the current state of the game, and obviously they're adding more. If you look in the game, they still have room on their menu for like eight more characters or something like that.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Um, but in the current state of the game, there is a high amount of replayability, and I'm sure if you went through one run, that would be your understanding run, and then your second run, you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing, or more than
Yeah.
the first one, obviously. But you can kind of refine it and then try something else and refine that and try
Yeah.
something else and refine that. And all along, you're trying different scenarios on the different nodes. You're trying to unlock pets. characters, all types of stuff,
Yeah.
new cards. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think those are four solid pros that really highlight what's best about the game. For cons, like we discussed, we did discuss the same map every game. I don't have a huge problem with it in general. Like it still has a really high replayability, like we're discussing. Biggest downside is that you always start on Act One. Act One becomes very, kind of just run of the mill. You really know what you're doing because a lot of times you'll die on Act Two, say if you don't complete your run, or you'll die on Act Three, so you only get to see a part of Act Two or Three. Well, you always do Act One first, and it's relatively easy to beat after you've gone through a couple runs. And again, this is just we're not playing on any extreme difficulties after the fact. There's a lot of ways to amplify your difficulty, which is a pro for the game, but the first act just becomes pretty, stagnant after like how many runs we're at now. It just is starting to become stagnant now, and it's not too bad.
we can only see crazy corn on the cob so many times.
Right, and this game absolutely will make you terrified of corn on the cob, so that is a con. You have another con here, Josh?
Yeah, going into that, same enemies and same locations.
Yeah,
The fights aren't always the same. It's not like you're going in there
right.
and then they're playing the exact same cards every single time. It's like the interactions will be different.
Yeah, they
But
pull from the same pool of cards, so
yeah,
sometimes you'll really expect the same big attack from one boss, and it's not always on the same turn, but you kind of know how to adjust to playing around that big attack. So yeah, that definitely adds to that portion, like you're saying.
yeah, that's it's like the same map isn't that bad just because of how much stuff there is. But as soon as you
Yeah.
get through all that stuff, then yeah, it becomes very, I guess, I don't want to say monotonous. I think that's the wrong term, but it
Yeah.
just gets a little dull because
Yeah.
you know what to expect on every encounter.
Right, exactly. The last kind I'd really put out there, I guess, would be the fact that characters themselves don't have a ton of unique cards. I said they each start with one, but like I said, you can build every warrior the same way. Now they won't always function as best as they could. As say, like one warrior is best with slashing damage, say one is best with blunt damage, but more unique cards or even unique items for those characters might allow that a little bit of flexibility between the own class. But like I said, between the four different classes, there's a lot of uniqueness. But I do think there could be a little bit more flexibility between the same class within the design. That also could lend to the fact that there are only two rogues and two wizards at the moment. So obviously, it is in early access. They will be getting more, but still, that I'd put that as a con at the moment, and maybe the con really should have just been there's not full amount of characters yet. Before we jump right into the rating system, the last thing I want to bring up too is that the path forward, they do have a really, really unique mode coming out that is answering the question. I feel like we shouldn't go throughout this episode without bringing this up, but they are putting out a mode that is a randomly generated map. It is just going to be like 2 acts, but the map will be fully randomly generated, with a ton more of events and different monster fights every time. So that is, huge. Like I said, you could play this for 30, 40 hours like Josh and I have and not really feel that wear and tear of, wow, this kind of feels the same. Josh and I are just kind of beginning to get to that point now, but they do have a mode coming out in the fall here, and we're recording in September 2021 if you're listening in the future, but that will hopefully be answering some of those concerns of the lack of, not really the lack of replayability, just that the fights can become a little stale and the map can become a little stale. So I think that's pretty cool. So we're going to go through our rating system, Josh. First up on the rating system, we're going to individually rate a few different aspects of the game, and then we'll give an overall podcast score that we didn't talk about beforehand. So we're going to have to
We did not.
we're going to have to agree on a number live here. So first off, what would you rate the graphics / art style of
Oh,
this game?
are we doing descriptions or like explanations, or we just
Yeah, you can do a full.
going right? Okay.
You can do a short
So
description. Yeah.
the art I will not say is bad, but I will not say it is blowing me away. So I'm going to go right in the middle and give it a 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I copied you. I had 3.5 at first. I went back to a 3. Like you said, there are some cool designs. There's some monsters, and
Definitely.
they also don't take themselves too seriously. Like we were just talking about corn on the cob, like attacking people. So there is some funniness. Like you will have a couple laughs as you go through. And again, for a deck builder, graphics and art style is definitely a lower weighted category. You don't need to be blown away by a card game necessarily. Although we are people who come from Legends of Runeterra, which has the prettiest art of all time. So
Yes.
it definitely helps. I'll go right in the middle with you, 3.0. speaking of categories that we don't really need to weight that high, how would you rate the story of this game?
We are going across the obelisk, and I will give that a 2 out of 5.
Yes, yeah. I copied. I said 2.5 or 2.0 again. Yeah, it's just it doesn't really matter to me the story. I mean, there are some cool interactions with characters where you see different things and you can get some easy, little sneak peeks of different. Oh, this character used to be this guy's general. This used to be this, and there's some cool little things trickled throughout there. But again, not an important factor for me, really at all.
I will
So
say the 2.0, I rated it as a story overall, but I
yeah,
guess if we were to change this to like, interactions of
right.
characters, there are a lot. So I would definitely rate that higher than a
Yeah.
2 if we were to go off of like character interactions, character stories.
Right. And again, these are the two. These will both probably play a larger role in future indie games that we're breaking down. But for a strategic deck building game, graphics and story are definitely not the highest weighted categories. The next three and the final three are all significantly higher. I don't even know which one's highest. But first off, Josh, how would you rate the combat system of this game?
The combat system, I actually for a card game, just because it's four play, like four individual decks that we're using,
Yeah.
going against enemies, like all the stuff that's involved in it. I actually really love the combat system, so I gave it a 4.5 out of 5.
Solid score, solid score. I put it at a 4.0. I do think there are some really unique things that they do. I really like the in general the combat system, how you're actually functioning, how you when you want to heal, when you want to guard, how the positions actually matter in the fight, where you have front to back. I think that's all unique. I do think there at times some cards appear to be different, but they're really kind of the same with maybe just different damage types, which are the same type of same dealing damage, but they don't do a whole lot. And I knocked it maybe a 0.25 off because of the pure amount of debuffs and buffs that there are in the game.
Yeah, that's
It
true.
it can become slightly overwhelming once you play a different deck builder. You kind of realize like, oh wow, I don't have to read 1,000 things right now. So, but still, really good scores for both of us for the combat system. I think the biggest category for anything that would consider itself a roguelite is the replayability. So, where'd you rate that at?
Yeah, so I gave it a 4, and basically just because I feel like we've played it a bunch and we're still going to unlock things. We're still figuring out character builds. There's just, I guess, a lot of content that we haven't, I feel like, touched. There's some cards that we haven't even played with yet,
Right.
and it's still going. And I feel like this score can increase, especially with the new mode that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Once the map becomes more replayable, it's like the replayability is kind of endless.
Yeah. I thought about giving this a 3.5 to start. I also went with a 4, and I thought, well, maybe it's going to be a 3.5 and then turn into a 4 once that new mode comes out. But we've played this a ton, and there's still more to do. Every run, we're unlocking a new pet, a new item, multiple new cards, etc., and doing something new. So even though the map's been the same right now, I'd still have to give it a 4. It's still that good with replayability, even with the same map, which is, I would have never guessed. I mean, it's definitely
Yeah.
a big thing.
Yeah, if you look at it um, just above, you just take a first glance. You're like, oh, if it's the same map. It's like, how does that work? It's like because you play Slay the Spire, you play Rogue Book, you play
Yep.
any of those. It's like an ever-changing map, and it's like different scenarios
Yep.
every single playthrough. So it's like if you just see it from surface level, it seems like it definitely will get boring. But it definitely has not. I still look forward to our runs that we're playing. So.
Yeah, right there with you. The last and maybe the most important for a lot of these type of games, I've said this for the last three, but they're all really close, is really the way the characters build. And this can be applied to any type of, it's not just deck builders, right? That most roguelike games will have a character build system as they go through. So, Josh, how would you put their character builds between 0 to 5?
So this is a really hard one for me. I have to kind of split it into two different categories because there's stuff that I really love and there's stuff that I really hate. And if I just went in the middle and gave it a 3, I don't think that would be fair. So the stuff that I really love, I love planning out the decks before
Yeah.
runs, and it just allows this consistency, and it allows your run isn't just going to be a waste of time because you didn't get the cards that you want. It's like inside the Spire, it's like, oh, I want to do a Shiv build with the green character, and it's like, oh, I didn't see any Shivs,
Right.
so I feel kind of bad. This you could buy your Shivs right from the beginning. So for builds in general, it's a 4.75 out of 5, just because that beginning scenario and being able to kind of go in with what I want.
Yeah.
And your character starts with the standard like a standard deck for itself, so it kind of lays out, what they're kind of good at, where you can build them. Now, in terms of those individual character builds, they have a lot of uniqueness with their starting perks, their leveling progression, and their individual card that they get, and their starting deck. But outside of that, they share all the same cards as their class.
Right.
So I give this part of it a 2.5 out of 5, just because I would like, you know, there's one character, Heimer, and his attack is a laser that he gets taunt and he damages all enemies. Well, there's no other cards that you get that even supports that for him.
Right.
So I would like some more, maybe as they're leveling up, you could get more unique cards for them,
Right.
or
Right.
as you're going through, progressing through, it's like if you see the scenario, you can get unique cards for them, or something. I would just like, you know, for Heimer to be Heimer and Magnus to be Magnus, and
Right.
them not to have so much intertwining, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I think it's perfectly said. I think I did what you said you weren't going to do, which is I split both those things right down the middle, and I just gave it a 3.5 for the character builds, and for those exact reasons. I perfectly think you said that perfectly. Yeah, I think it's just well said, and that's really the main reason why I put that at a 3.5. There's not a whole lot of really big faults with the run aspect. I really like that you plan your decks out beforehand. I think it makes this really unique feel to the game, and I think that adds a lot to the score there for me because
Yeah.
you're instantly feeling like your deck is rocking right off the bat. It does add maybe a 10-minute preparation phase to the game,
Yes.
but once you get past that, you've already at your build, and then you have a fun build right to start with. So you jump right into the action, which is super fun.
I will say one thing that I would like to note. So, like, Slay the Spire is a lot about refining a combo,
Hmm.
and making it so that your deck, whatever you draw, performs the same way in every fight. So it's
Right.
like the appeal for Slay the Spire is, oh, I'm going in there, I'm building this way, I am refining my deck towards that, and you're just unleashing this combo turn after turn. This it allows a minimum of 15 cards,
Yep.
and you defaultly draw five. It's five per turn, right?
Yeah, and then there's of course the another keyword with inspire, which allows you to draw additional cards. But
Yes.
yes.
Yes. So per character, you draw five per turn. So there are other things that can let you draw,
Yep.
but your kind of well-oiled machine like Slay the Spire is like slightly bigger, and there's slightly more RNG with pulling your cards.
Yep.
But that's not to say like all of your cards. Obviously, you're going to get some crappy pulls, but you know we've discovered, we refined this 15 card machine, and you can upgrade your cards, and you can make your deck like function very well while not having the same turns over and over again, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And also, you kind of have to be ready for more things in this game, which adds to the character build because sometimes these random flex cards, we weren't taking a whole lot of Dispel and a whole lot of really unique random cards that got rid of one specific condition. And then once we ran into that fight, that condition became such a big thing, it made it brutal. So the adds to the builds factor because only certain classes have access to these type of abilities. So definitely adds to it. So overall, Josh, we got to come up with a podcast score. My gut is leaning again, this is the first episode of Indie Ignition, so I don't want to give it like we can't come over here and just stamp down like a 5. We're really only going to review games that we really enjoy as well to start, so it's got to be above a 3 for me.
Are we going out of five?
Out of 5, yeah.
Okay, out of five. Oh, definitely above a three.
Is it
If
above
you
a 4?
so If I was to rate it out of 10, I was going to say I'd give it probably an 8.5 on that
Okay,
level. So I'm going to say slightly above a 4, yes.
I'm fair with that. I would probably, the highest I'm willing to go on this is probably 4.2 right now. What do you think?
4.2. I could handle a 4. I was going to say, 4.25, but I can
All
handle
right,
I can handle a 4.2.
we'll go 4.2 is the official Indie Ignition score of Across the Obelisk. Only more things to come for this game. It is an early access still, which is incredible, and it's getting a lot of love, a lot of patches that are coming out. If you want to stay tuned, you can jump into their Discord, and they will keep you updated with whenever something new comes out for that game. And they are hard at work on the next expansion, which, like I said, is introducing an entire new game mode, which could make us completely have to revisit this game because a lot is going to change with that one. So that's a super exciting aspect to it. As for us, if you're interested, you can follow us on Twitter at indie_ignition_, and our home is at the Twin Suns podcast on Twitter, and we have a Discord there as well with our entire play group of massive. I think it's around 600 players who play Player and Terror and just other games in general. So if you feel like hanging out, catch us there. Any final words, Josh?
Yes, Across the Obelisk has the Twin Suns stamp of approval.
You did it. Congratulations.